What's up, YouTube? Today we're going to be talking about a subject that I'm sure you might have come across if you've spent any amount of time on filmmaking YouTube, and that's film emulation. The film look is everywhere these days, so much so that Blackmagic added a film look creator to DaVinci Resolve 19. When I was first getting into shooting video, this obsession with filmic characteristics mystified me. Even though I started with black and white film photography in high school, I've always leaned towards a clean, digital aesthetic. This has started to shift for me over the last year or two, probably because a lot of the creators I follow here on YouTube opt for a more filmic and organic looking presentation, and I've no doubt been influenced by that. I started experimenting with the Film Look Creator in DaVinci Resolve, which, while functional, is not the most comprehensive tool. This leads us to the focus of today's video, which, as you might have guessed, is Dehancer. Now, Dehancer did reach out to me and ask if I'd be willing to try out their software and make a video about my experiences. This is not a sponsored video and no money has changed hands, but I do get a license key in exchange for making this video, and I do have an affiliate code that I'll throw up on screen that will save you 10% on Dehancer. As always, my thoughts and opinions are my own, and I will try to help you make the most informed decision with your money that I can. The best way to review Dehancer is to show you it in action. I've got a couple of clips that may or may not appear in a future video here on the channel, so let's hop into DaVinci Resolve and get started. Okay, so now we're in DaVinci Resolve. First thing we're going to talk about is color management. So we're going to go to project settings. I prefer to work in a CST workflow. I have this just set to DaVinci Wide RGB and not DaVinci Wide RGB color managed. I have my timeline color space set to DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate, and my output color space set to Rec 709 and Gamma 2.4. So we're going to go back to our timeline node tree, and as you see, I have a CST in, CST out, Dehancer in the middle, and a sharpen effect after the CST out. I have also done some per clip adjustments on these clips already. This is an exposure node where I am using the HDR wheels mapped to the Sony S-Gamut.3.Cine color space for more accurate exposure adjustments. And then I'm using the saturation tool in the color slice panel for my sat adjustments. So we will go back to timeline. First, we're going to reset everything, and you'll notice that the Kodak Vision 3 250D film profile is applied by default. So I'm going to turn that off. I'm actually going to go down to the bottom here and hit disable all tools. One thing to note is that it's going to default to quality normal fast. I would advise keeping it on normal fast while you are dialing in the grade and then turning it to high slow before you actually export, just to minimize performance impacts as much as you can. There is a set workflow for this that Dehancer recommends using, so we're going to start with input, and there are really two ways you can do this. One is you can do what I like to do, and you can just choose DaVinci Wide Gamut / Intermediate as your source, and then you can go to here and select Sony S-Gamut.Cine and Sony S-Log3 as your input gamma and input color space, then change this to DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate, and then go to your CST out, have the color space transform, and change this to DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate, and then change this to Rec 709 and Gamma 2.4. So that's one way you can do it. The other way you can do that is that you can turn both of these nodes off with Control D, go back to Dehancer, and you can choose camera. This is not a perfect color space transform. They have done the work to input a sort of stylized color space based on the specific camera, and they have just an enormous variety of cameras you can choose from for this. So this footage was recorded on the Sony a6700 in Sony S-Log3 S-Gamut 3.Cine. So I have that selected here. This is slightly different looking than if you were to do Wide Gamut Intermediate and do the color space transform route. It's a little bit more stylized, has a little bit more of a look baked into it already. But the reason I prefer to do it via the CST nodes and leave this in DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate is that if you haven't already balanced your footage, it's less accurate in my opinion. You are already starting with a little bit of a look baked into your image. And as far as white balance, it does make it a little trickier. So I just prefer to have as neutral of a starting point as I can when I start color grading my image. So now that we have our input selected, we're going to go down to film. We're going to hit enable. I am not the hugest fan of Kodak in terms of film. I've always really preferred some of the Fujifilm looks and the Fujifilm film stock. So I'm going to start with some of these. I'm going to start flipping through them. A couple ones I like are the Velvia 50. That looks pretty nice. I also like the two Fujicolor print, the industrial 100 and 400. 400 is just a little bit brighter. The Fujicolor Pro 400H is also pretty nice. Looks like a pretty neutral starting point. And then the Fujicolor Superior 200 is another favorite of mine. But for this, I think I'm going to start with Fujicolor Pro 400H. And then we're going to go down to the print tab. There are a couple options here. You have linear, which is more of a modern digital style look. You have Cineon Film Log, which I haven't really messed around with. And then you have a couple of print emulations. You have Fujifilm 3513, Kodak 2383, which most people are probably going to gravitate towards, and then Kodak Indura glossy paper. We're going to start with the Fujifilm. Actually, first we're going to enable this tab so that it actually takes. I'm going to try that, try that, I'm going to try that. And I'm thinking I like the 2383 the most. I prefer not to mess with the exposure and target white tabs in this and do that outside of Dehancer in my balancing nodes. But I am going to start cranking up the color contrast. As you can see, that makes pretty enormous difference already. And we're also going to ramp up the color density just to give it more of a filmic subtractive saturation to our colors. And also turn on analog range limiter, which essentially compresses the contrast range a little bit, lifts up the blacks and compresses the highlight roll off. I go back and forth on this. Sometimes it cuts the contrast a little more than I would like, but I think what I will do is I will turn this on and then go back to my tonal contrast and just nudge that up a little bit. We're next going to go to the expand tab, and we're going to adjust our black point and white point. So I'm going to bring the black point up a little bit, just get, again, a little bit more contrast. And actually not really going to touch the white point too much. Actually, I think I will just bring it a little bit down just so I can recover a little bit of detail in the highlights. Going to go to the film development tool next, and we're going to click this on. I'm going to again start with contrast, bring up the contrast a little bit because I love my contrast. We're not going to touch gamma correction again, and then we are going to leave color separation as is, and we're going to jack up the color boost so that get a little more color into our image. Going to go to film compression next. Again, click this on. That made a pretty significant change. As you can see, turn this off, turn this on. And a lot of this is going to be in the impact tab, and this just, again, really affects the highlight roll off. So I'm going to bring this down a little bit, change the white point, again, crank this up so I get a little bit more highlight recovery. The tonal range is probably the biggest, most evident adjustment in this tab. The first two are very, very subtle. But I'm going to bring this slider up, which, as you see, just compresses that image just a little bit more and really brings down your highlights so that it's more in the center of the waveform. And then we're going to just play with the color density tab a little bit. So again, get a little bit more of that subtractive saturation. We're going to go down to next the color head. Some people don't really like this, but I find that it's a quick and easy way to get some split toning into your image. We're going to look at these color channels first. We have the yellow blue. So as you move it to the yellow side, move it to the blue side. That seems a little bit much. I'm going to just nudge it ever so slightly towards blue. Magenta green. I don't feel like either of those are really doing anything for the image. So I'm going to leave that as is. And cyan red. I'm actually going to bring this ever so slightly towards red. And gang just means that these three sliders will move in unison. So if you do that, they'll all reset and then they'll move together, which I don't really want to do. So I'm going to undo that. And then in shadows tone, I'm going to bring the shadows. Actually, I think I'm going to bring the shadows. I like to do almost a reverse teal and orange look with this a lot of the time. So I will actually bring my shadows up into more warmer tones. And then with the mid-tones, I will actually bring those cooler. And I haven't found that the highlights tone makes a whole lot of difference. So I'm just going to, again, shift the mid-tones more towards cool and leave the preserve exposure and impact where they are. And then next we have film grain. Dehancer is renowned for having some of the best film grain in the industry. When you first turn it on, it's pretty heavy. So I prefer to, actually we'll pull this up and so you can get an idea of just how much grain it introduces when you turn it on by default. I'm going to turn this to the 65mm 50 ISO, so it's just a very, very slight film grain, and that's as much film grain as I really am going to like here. So bring us back, and then I've experimented a little bit with halation, which really gives you a sort of red fringing around highlights and edges, similar to how it would in real film. I find that it just looks a little too exaggerated. It's too filmic for me, so I normally end up skipping this. So if you turn this off, I'm just going to turn that off. Same with bloom. Bloom is just, actually that looks kind of cool. I don't mind that. So I'm going to change this to 75mm and just play with that a little bit. So we're going to leave that there. And then for these next ones, these are, as you can see, you've got some film damage artifacts that pop up. This is just too much for me. This is a large part of the part of Dehancer, which, the truth is that, a lot of what I appreciate about film is more about the tonal balance and colors, and not so much the sort of imperfections, per se, of film. So I'm going to leave this off. The same thing with film breath. It's just very subtle. You saw it right up in the upper right-hand corner. It's just not my thing. Same thing with gate weave. I haven't played around with these settings too much because they're just not really my thing. Too filmic for me, unfortunately, but I'm sure there are people out there who appreciate them. Next, we're going to turn on Vignette. That's a little strong. Bring this up a little bit. Actually, I've overexposed that, so I think I'm going to leave this off entirely. I don't think it really works for this shot because too much of the subject is too close to the edges of the frame for me to really leave this on. This is a pretty cool tool. So this basically gives you false color in image, which is pretty nice. I'll bring this up on another shot in a second. Actually, I'll just come over to here. And this gives you a skin tone map with your false color that you can use to monitor your exposure, which is pretty cool. And then you also have a clipping indicator that shows that we're clipping in the shadows in these spots here, but we're not clipping any of our highlights, which is good because I always try to avoid clipping my highlights when I shoot. And as you see, there's nothing clipping in this image. And as for output, this is just sort of almost a keyframe-like slider, which will tell you just how much of the image you're impacting. So I think I'm just going to leave this at 100. And then, of course, you can create a LUT based on the preset that you've dialed in to use for monitoring, either on your camera or on a camera monitor. And I have done that, and I'm actually using that right now on my on-camera monitor to monitor what I look like right now. And then, like I said before, there's the quality tab, which I will change to high-slow once I decide to export this. All right, so we're going to start on over on this clip. We're going to change this to DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. We're going to uncheck this, and we're going to uncheck the film grain. We will go through the film, and we're going to scroll back up to the Fuji Color or Fujifilm ones. For this, I think I'm going to do either Superia 1600 or Fuji Color 100, and I think I'm going to go with the Fuji Color 100 film stock. One thing I forgot to mention when I was talking through this earlier is you do have a push-pull. I'm actually going to underexpose this slightly, and then we're going to go to the film print. For this one, I think I'm going to go with Fujifilm 3513. There's a little bit of blue in the shadows, which I kind of like with this one for more of this moody, edgy shot. Turn on analog range limiter and bump up the tonal contrast and the color density. I'm going to go to the expand tab. I'm going to bring down the black point a little bit and bring up the white point a little bit, just so we can get a little bit more contrast. Go to film compression. You can see what that did to the background just now. We're going to actually bring a little bit of that back in the tonal range tab. And we're going to, again, jack up the color density. But we're just going to go to Film Developer and, again, boost the contrast a little bit and boost the colors a little bit. We'll scroll down to Color Head, turn this on. Right now I'm going to push this a little bit towards blue, push this a little bit more towards green, and push it a little bit towards red. I'm going to bring the shadows cooler and the midtones a little bit warmer. Go to film grain, 65mm ISO 50. Looks good to me. And for this one, I actually might want to use the vignette. So turn this on. That looks good to me. Play with this a little bit. Yeah. And you do have a mask mode feature to show you what part of the image is being affected by the vignette. And I think we're done. As you can see, went from here to here. Or I suppose more accurately, we went from here to here. And I like that a lot. And we can go through the various shots on this timeline, which I've balanced and adjusted exposure for already. And I think they all look pretty good. I do want to talk a little bit about performance for a second. One thing to note is that Dehancer can be pretty demanding on your GPU. I have a 3060 Ti, and I've definitely had some crashes using Dehancer with too many other programs open. So if you're experiencing the same, I recommend closing everything else. I also want to talk briefly about Dehancer for mobile. Dehancer offers an app for iOS that duplicates almost all of the functionality of the Resolve plugin, which is pretty impressive. I'll throw a couple of images I developed using the mobile app up on screen now. It also supports raw image editing, which is really nice. My one complaint with the iOS app is that the images it outputs are relatively low resolution. They're fine for uploading to Instagram, but I wish there was an option to output higher resolution or uncompressed files. So what do I think about Dehancer? I think it's an incredibly powerful, flexible, and easy-to-use program that a ton of work has obviously gone into, especially into the film stock emulations themselves. There's also a historical preservation angle to the whole endeavor, which I think is worth thinking about and appreciating. The biggest issue with Dehancer is quite frankly the price. It's $449 for a lifetime license, which is an enormous amount of money to spend as a hobbyist. I'm very grateful to have been given the opportunity to review Dehancer, but as someone who does not shoot photos or videos professionally, I would never have purchased it myself. On the other hand, if you work with video professionally, an incredibly powerful tool like Dehancer might just give your videos the filmic look that you've always wanted. What do you think, though? Do plugins like this justify their cost, or do you prefer do-it-yourself grading techniques? Let me know in the comments. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you sticking around to the end of the video. There's plenty of other videos in the works, and I can't wait for you to see them. Until next time, this is Bedrock Reviews, signing off.